Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along to this webinar, Modelling the Just Transition, a Journey to Net Zero in Emerging Markets. And I think before we get formally started, we'll wait for a few more attendees to come, but it's nice to see people from all sorts of different financial institutions, research organizations, advisory firms, and from lots of different countries by the looks of things. That's one of the fantastic things about New York Climate Week, and is the amazing amount of events and the diversity of different sessions. So we hope to make a small contribution to that in this session. And I'm joined by Justine Bolton from First Rand, from my Sharad Tuladar, and Dinesh Dalal from NMB Bank in Nepal. And by Julia Debadnini from the Jim Foundation and from FMO, the Dutch Development Finance Institution. And we have an apology from our colleague Wilson from Banco Pichincha in Ecuador. He's had the happy news of he's become a father this week, so he's on paternity leave. So he sends his apologies and his best wishes. So here's the panel. And for the next hour, we're going to dive in a bit to the joint impact model, but in the context of how it can help financial institutions in emerging markets, developing countries, to do their carbon accounting, the first step in the transition planning to a net zero financed emissions in their portfolios. And so it's fantastic that we have First Rand in South Africa and NMB Nepal joining us on that. And then my colleague Julia will be helping me facilitate from the joint impact model, which is now a Dutch NGO foundation, and based in Amsterdam. So just before we kind of dive into the model, I just wanted to ask our panelists a little bit about the way this just transition and net zero is being talked about in their home countries. And Justine, I wonder if I can start with you just to give a kind of brief comment on kind of how this discussion is going and how you see it developing.
Sure, thanks, Alex, and hi, everyone. Yeah, I think net zero is on everybody's tongues globally at the moment, and certainly here in South Africa as well. At the moment, we're sort of watching the rest of the world and watching the developed North, I think, and their net zero commitments, because the concept of a just transition is quite real and important for us. Coming from a coal-based emerging economy, we've got a lot of considerations about jobs and our socioeconomic context. So we're watching the net zero commitments with interest, but focusing on the just transition part of it, because it's important for us if and when we do transition, not to leave anybody behind. So the jobs in the economy part of it is an important consideration for us. It's something that we're giving a lot of attention to, and don't want to be left behind, but want to give it some real in-depth consideration as we plan for our transition.
Thank you, Justine. And Sharad, a brief word about how's the situation in Nepal. It's quite different from South Africa because you're a largely hydroelectric-based economy, so you don't have the coal challenge that South Africa does. But what's the dialogue in Kathmandu?
I think I would request my colleague Dinesh to say a few words about that, since Dinesh would be the right person to do that. Dinesh, please.
Great.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you, Alex. So if you see the contribution of Nepal in global emission, so we are only the 0.05% contributor for global emission. But if you see from the vulnerability part, so we are one of the most vulnerable country because of the climate change or the rising the temperature. So, but if you see our grid electricity, so we are already we are using the clean energy, so mostly which is mostly dominated by the hydroelectricity. So we don't have any coal fire plant or any other thermal power plant. So we are transitioning from a little bit clean energy to the more going towards the cleaner future. So we don't see any job loss due to our transition to net zero because we are developing more hydro. If you see the NDC target set by the government of Nepal, so right now we have 2,200 megawatt of electricity. So by 2030, our government has set a target to develop 50,000 megawatt of hydroelectricity and other renewable energy technology. So we are creating more jobs in this renewable energy, clean energy sector. So helping the economy to grow in more cleaner or greener way.
Fantastic, thank you. That's good context. And Julia, you're based in The Hague in the Netherlands, but you're Argentinian. What's the kind of engagement of the financial sector in net zero and carbon accounting in Argentina?
Yeah, I think that the engagement is actually quite low. I think that a lot more can be done to let financial institutions know that measuring emissions is possible and that it can be done with different tools that are now being made available in the market, but that there just isn't that much, let's say, focus on that right now because of a lot of the economic troubles that Argentina has with inflation and corruption in the government. And so it always keeps getting put on the back burner where the economy has to be put first. And we're hoping that, that more can be done to be able to do both at the same time because it's critical right now.
Thank you. Great. So different countries, all different contexts. But the if we kind of begin the very brief introduction to the initiative that we're pushing here, our kind of proposition is that there's a real need for the financial sector to be able to get started on its carbon accounting journey, and lots of people are working on that and making contributions. However, we do see that the financial sector in developing countries is at this stage, and I think this is expected, that is not as engaged or being engaged as some of the big global financial players, and so our vision is to work in an inclusive way to support the financial sector so that it can decarbonize its financial portfolios, but in a way that really still contributes significantly economically and in terms of employment to the host countries that you're operating in. So that's the vision of the Joint Impact Model Foundation, which, as I mentioned, is a non-profit foundation, and it was spun out from development finance institutions over the last 2 years. So if we can step forward a slide, please. So we think there's around 2,400 banks in emerging markets. There's data from the IMF, and so that that could represent 5 to 10% of the world's financed emissions. The answer is we don't really know for sure because so few of these banks are like NMB and First Round are real leaders here in terms of getting a handle on financed emissions, but the vast majority of these banks don't know, and so we can't really say. But it's an unaccounted for part of the global emissions portfolio, and probably a significant one. And so although there's no doubt that the big global banks bear the primary responsibility for making fast progress on net zero, we also want to see whether we can help engage developing country banks so that they can play their part and not be kind of down at the back of the queue for support and assistance in net zero. Okay, if we can go forward one more. So our goal at the Joint Impact Model is to support 240 financial institutions over the next period, and hope that sort of gets to some sort of tipping point where in lots of different countries there's one or two banks that are taking a real leadership position and they can then exert some peer pressure and some advantage and some technical support to other banks so that we reach some sort of tipping point in engaging the financial sector in carbon accounting. And why is carbon accounting so important then? It's clearly one of the first steps that you need to take in the journey to net zero and your transition plan. If we can go to the next slide, please. You can make a disclosure, which is increasingly required through TCFD. You can begin to benchmark both between different products and different sectors and different types of clients. And then, of course, and most important, you can take action in terms of getting to net zero by 2050, or if not earlier. And then, the measurement is a continuous part of that cycle. So there's nothing particularly innovative about this model, but we do want to make sure that banks aren't just kind of measuring and disclosing, and then that's the end of their journey, because that won't get them to net zero. So we'll spend a bit of time in the seminar talking to the two banks about kind of where this leads after the disclosure. Thanks. Next slide, please. So how does this all fit in? Well, obviously, there's plenty of initiatives, and apologies if I've omitted any from this slide. But kind of broadly speaking, financial institutions can make a commitment to disclosure through mechanisms like the TCFD and the GFANZ, the Financial Alliance for Net Zero. They can join the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, PCAF, and its global standard. And they can also increasingly, and probably in the next 6 months or so, they can also sign up to a science-based target using a standard that's under development currently from the SBTI initiative for the financial institutions. So there's plenty of ways to engage here, and I'm sure there are other ones as well. My observation is that so far there's relatively few financial institutions from developing countries that have signed up to TCFD, joined the GFANZ commitments, become a partner of the PCAF, or have engaged in the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So these are mainly for the big global and OECD banks at the moment, these initiatives. And so, obviously it's great if more and more banks will join these initiatives, but our hope is also that kind of making things easier for banks so that they can sort of get their, if you like, their table stakes in this process a bit more easily, and without having to kind of invest a lot of resources that some of the banks don't have in the initial steps in terms of making these commitments. So if we can go on one more slide, please. So I'm going to ask Julia to do a brief demonstration of the joint impact model, how it helped banks. But before that, I just wanted to check from our attendees. I see we've got over 70 attendees now. If you want to make comments or ask questions, preferably comments in the chat function, and then submit formal questions in the Q&A, and then our team can allocate those to one of the panelists as we go. So please do fire that, and I'll keep an eye on it. But Julia, can you give us a very quick walkthrough of the model, please?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Alex. So I want to go over the features of the GIM, and then I want to give a sneak preview of what the GIM 3.0 is going to be looking like for those that are already current users, but also those who are interested in signing up to become a user. And then we'll speak about the pilot, which is something that we're very busy with at the moment. So we can tell you more about that. So the GIM has certain features that we find investors need to be able to do their emissions accounting. One of the things is that it's comprehensive, of course. It can look at various different KPIs at once. It's country and sector specific. So you can look at your results by sector, by country, also by client. You can do some analysis, but the tool is best used for portfolio analysis, of course. It's easy to operate. We're really trying to make it as the least resource intensive as possible, so that and also low cost, so that people can just become a user quite easily and be able to run the results. We want to make it comparable, so that's also something that we find really important, and actually is one of the main reasons why we wanted to start the gym, is because previously we just couldn't compare our results even between the DFIs. And now we find that actually sharing this model with more and more institutions, we can actually do some comparisons, which previously were just not possible because each person had their own model or had no models at all. We are using the latest data, and we're also engaging with industry experts in order to have the best results available for everybody who is a user. And we are a collaborative, engaged community. We are always sharing how we are using the gym with other institutions so that we can learn from each other. And it's a cloud-based web app that is cyber secure and fully encrypted. And at the moment, we're not saving any data. Whenever you use the gym, it's just calculating in the cloud, and then it gives you the results. So the data never leaves your server. And we find that the gym is helping financial institutions measure their impact and also gain credibility. And we want to be as inclusive as possible so that everybody can use the most globally accepted standards and the best practices, not just in OECD countries, but also emerging markets. We find that really important. We want to reduce costs as much as possible so that we can lower that entry barrier. And we also want to help build that strategic capacity for the just transition so that you can actually become actionable after using the tool. Otherwise, you just get numbers and then the question arises, so what? I have a number, what does this mean? We want to go beyond that. So I just want to share with you a sneak peek of what the input and output will be looking like for GIM 3.0. So this is an example of a financial institution that has their sector breakdown and then is giving us their total outstanding amount. What the GIM can do is it can calculate the scopes 1, 2, and 3 of the end beneficiary or the end borrowers. It can also calculate employment according with the same methodology that is used for emissions, so that you can compare like for like, and the same for contribution to GDP. And we have found that this is the only tool that looks at both ends of the spectrum, economic development, but also environmental degradation or decarbonization, because we find that in emerging markets, you just cannot just ignore the other one. You really need both in order to make your case and say we need decarbonization, but that does not mean that you need to have reduced jobs or reduced economic development. So how are we doing this exactly? We have just, as Alex said, we've set up the GIM Foundation. What we want to do is we want to provide access, train, and make changes as needed to the joint impact model. What I mentioned earlier is we're collaborative. We collaborate with each other, and we're very open to feedback, and we're always willing to change our methodology. If we have users that are mentioning, hey, we don't like the way a certain thing is working, or if we have industry experts that come in and say, hey, we actually don't agree with your methodology, we're always open to that. We want to hear from everyone, want to make changes so that we can. And so right now we are working with NMB, with First Rand, and also Banco Pichincha to be able to develop them on using the GIM and becoming leaders on target setting. We want to then also train them on the methodology so that they can help develop local capacity with our support, of course. But the idea is that they can show banks in their region, this is how we are doing it, you can do it as well. And then that means that then we can scale and we can reach the 240 banks, financial institutions in emerging markets that Alex mentioned earlier. And where do we want to go? So this year we launched the nonprofit foundation. And at the moment, we have the impacts that we can measure, our jobs, value-added GHG emissions, and we are PCAF aligned. And we have some services. We are doing one-on-one consultations. We're working on setting up training videos, quarterly sessions so that you can ask your questions. And then in 2023, we want to make changes to the GYM according to the feedback that we're getting from the financial institutions themselves. But we also want to provide SFDR reporting, because there are a lot of things that come into regulatory reporting that actually the GYM can help with as well. And then we want to be able to give services such as checking your results so that you can feel comfortable reporting them. Yeah, having joint training sessions, of course, and one-on-one training services. In 2024, we want to expand so that you can do physical data calculations and also including climate risk, which is also becoming very important for regulatory reporting, but also to be able to manage the risk of your portfolio with climate change coming up. And we want to work with service providers for collecting data and doing benchmarking more streamlined. And then in 2025, we want to also add other KPIs that are important for regulatory reporting and have a fully fledged IFRS, ISSB regulatory reporting tool. And so now
Thanks, Julia. That's just the couple of people questioning that kind of expansion of different impacts, and obviously the clue is in the name, joint impact. So the ambition would be to add additional impacts, both negative environmental impacts, but also core to our proposition is positive impacts to contribution to GDP and to employment and livelihoods. And so, yes, with the SFDR in Europe, but also the emerging international sustainability standards will give us a kind of steer. Some of those are going to be much harder than others to model. Some of them will require direct observation, but others can be modeled. We don't think that modeling is the right approach for every single impact, clearly. But I think somebody else, I think, forgive me for the pronunciation, QT Quinn, asking about who do we mean by clients? So we do mean the bank clients. And so in the case of First Run Justine, I believe that's 1.3 million borrowers, of which at least 50,000 businesses, if I'm not mistaken, for First Round. And Sharad and Dinesh, how many clients in Nepal for NMB?
Sorry, Alex, what was the question?
How many clients do you have roughly in the bank?
I think it should be more than 5,000.
And that's business clients, yeah. So I think I think the key to the key to this modelling question is if you're a small private equity firm and you have a fund and you make 12 investments in a single country and you are closely involved in the management of those investments, then you don't really need to model the impacts, because you can just go round and count them directly for your 12 portfolio companies, and you'll know them extremely well, and you'll have high expectations of their ability to measure their own carbon emissions and tell you, and then you can report and manage as you see fit. But so that's why we're focusing much more on banks and much bigger portfolio holders, where the numbers of clients are so great and the level of sophistication of those clients is relatively low that it's not really easy to engage with all of them and ask them to directly measure their impacts and report them to the bank. So that's where we see modelling coming in for people with big portfolios, either in a single country or across multiple countries. Justine, give us a flavour about First Rand. You're big in South Africa, but you have operations in other countries as well.
Yeah, that's right. We operate in a number of African subsidiaries, Botswana, Mozambique, Zambia, so a number of other African countries, as well as presence in the UK and India. And I don't know if you want me to speak to that now, Alex, but the focus of our pilot here is really to try and get more regionally specific emissions data on our African subsidiaries, where we've found there's a gap, and we're hoping to address that through this exercise. Alex, I'm not sure if you're on mute. I can't hear you.
I beg your pardon. So I was just going to ask, just before we get into that, Justine, could you just tell us very briefly, how did the bank first get involved in this journey at all? I believe you were an early sign up to the Partnership for Carbon Accounting.
We were, and I think the reason we wanted to join PCAF is, First Rand, like many other financial institutions, we're aware of the impact that our activities have on the environment and on climate change, not only through our own operations, but primarily through our lending and investment activities, and also aware of the risk that climate change can pose to our clients and to our investments. So by joining PCAF, it just gave us an introduction and a tool to start measuring that risk and those impacts through understanding what our financed emissions are in the case of joining PCAF and looking at our portfolio carbon accounting. So driven by the need to understand and measure our portfolio carbon, and it just provided us with an introduction and a tool to do so.
That's great. Thank you. Sorry to cut across you. And then you were just sort of saying kind of why the modelling approach, and something about your operations across Africa.
Sure. And I mean, I don't know if many participants on the call have had similar experience, but one of the biggest challenges we find with measuring our financed emissions is data availability, not just sort of in our own business in terms of the data that we use to measure and model and plug into the carbon accounting calculations, but specifically regionally specific data that we can use to quantify the emissions part of the equation. In South Africa, we've probably got a little bit more than in the rest of the African subsidiaries, but there's huge gaps in our African subs in terms of getting specific emission factors, specific emissions profiles of our assets. So it's those data gaps that we wanted to plug, and that's where the GIM model, the GIM tool comes in, because it's just got those regionally specific emissions factors that we can use to make the calculations a little bit more relevant and accurate and context specific. Also, what we're hoping to achieve through the tool is a bit of a focus on our agricultural portfolio, which is a big part of First Rand's investments, and clients are in the agri sector. So we're hoping to do some more modelling in those portfolios, again, with a specific focus on each of these subsidiaries so that we can get relevant and real, sort of more realistic information.
And that's very interesting. So, a lot of people, when they start on this carbon accounting, they think, oh, well, we just need to look into the energy sector and maybe kind of automotive, and that will probably get us kind of, 90% of our emissions. Can you say a little bit about what you've discovered so far in agriculture?
Sure. I mean, you're right. There's various approaches to starting carbon accounting, and where do you start? Usually, you do a hotspot analysis on where your carbon intensive sectors are. And we did do that. We looked at so where are high emitting sectors that we invest in, but also where are the vulnerable sectors, and agriculture kind of falls into both of those. There's high emissions associated with agricultural activities, but it's also a very vulnerable sector in terms of being exposed to climate change and the effects thereof. And as I say, it's a big part of our lending book. So that's why there's a specific interest in the agri sector. It also, links to a lot of other impacts that we're interested in. I was pleased to see in your sort of roadmap going forward that there'll be a focus on impacts, risks, and then things like biodiversity, because natural capital and biodiversity is also of interest to us. So it really is an important sector for us to focus on from those perspectives.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Justine. I'll come back and ask you a couple more questions in a minute. Before I go to NMB Bank, Julia, I just wanted to ask you, you've been engaging with Banco Pichincha in Ecuador. Can you just tell us a little bit about how they got involved? And because I believe they're a client of FMO, and kind of how they started, because I think it was kind of an interesting way that they went about getting started on their journey.
Yes, so Banco Pichincha, they are actually part of the global steering group of PCAF itself, and so they're always quite engaged with how PCAF was developing their standards. And when we asked them whether they wanted to join the GIM PCAF pilot, they were very interested, because there's about 20% of the portfolio that they were able to cover. They were doing motor vehicle loans and the real estate. They had good coverage. They had good data. They were following the PCAF, the PCAF methodology. But for the rest of their portfolio, for the rest of their business loans, they didn't have any data at all. And they didn't really have a way to disclose on the rest of their portfolio. And that's why when the GIM ran some of its results, Wilson from Banco Pichincha was really surprised and was really happy to see that you could actually derive some results from your outstanding portfolio if you do good mapping. So that's what we helped him out with.
And Julie, just to kind of keep you on your toes, there's a good question here in the Q&A from QN again, talking about the PCAF standard has different quality levels, 1 to 5. Where does GIM kind of come in on those quality levels in terms of direct or estimated emissions?
Yep. So the PCAF standard, indeed, it has quality score from 1 to 5, 1 being the highest and 5 being the lowest quality. At the moment, the GIM is able to serve on different levels depending on the data that you input. So if you put the most minimal data, which is what I was just showing with just the sector breakdown, you can get to quality level 5. If you enter more specific data, you can get to level 4. And at the GIM, we want to continue improving our modeling so that it can also give results that are aligned with data quality 3 and 2 and 1. And but that's more in the future. At the moment, we are mostly helping with proxy data, because that's the minimum. We struggle to get that amount of data from emerging markets. And so as time goes on, we'll see that will be more and more data will be made available. But for the moment, yeah, that's what we are. That's how we feel we can best serve the clients that we're working with at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So Sharad and Dinesh, you may or may not know that Pichincha actually is the name of a famous volcano in Ecuador, but I'm afraid it's only 4,700 or 4,800 meters high. So let's go to Nepal, where you've got some real mountains. And can you tell us, how did you get started on this carbon accounting journey? What were the first initiatives that you signed up to? Because I think you're also an early starter in this area.
So
yes,
Dinesh, would you like to take?
Yeah, you can. You can take it.
So the PCAF journey is linked with the sustainability agenda taken forward by the NMB. So it's closely associated with the sustainability agenda. And our journey started from 2015, when we became the member of Global Alliance for Banking and Values. So from that date, we started practicing value-based banking. And in the annual conference of Global Alliance for Banking and Value in 2019, it's in Vancouver, Canada. So we signed one pledge, which mentioned like that within 3 years time frame, we will even publish our finance emission by following PCAF methodology. And when we go through the PCAF methodology, it's the best available methodology or standard for the financial institution who are willing to disclose their finance emission. So by following that standard, we became the first commercial bank from the country who disclose our finance emission. And our even PCAF journey is further reinforced by our membership in the PCAF steering committee. So NMB Bank is in the steering committee of PCAF as well. So Saradai, would like to add anything?
Yeah, surely, Alex. What I would say is there are two contexts: our own, the bank's perspective, and the country context. And to add to what Dinesh had said, our relationship with other DFIs and especially FMO being the major largest shareholder at NMB. I think FMO has driven quite a few initiatives within NMB, and sustainability being our own business strategic intent. In addition to that, ESG has become a very big part for us since our association, since FMO has become the primary major shareholder at NMB, and our relationships with DFI, and our major focus is financing towards real economy and having 100 and more sustainable projects in our portfolio, and targeting for a carbon offset of some say 10,500 tons. That's what we have in our sustainability strategy. So that's there within the bank, and outside the bank, since the country has a commitment towards COP26 that it would decarbonize and aim towards net zero by 2045, and have 15% of total energy demand supported by clean energy sources, and maintain 45% of our country under forest cover. So that's the country aspirations and our own intent to become the first bank in the country who would lead in ESG as well as climate resilience. So these two focus areas has taken us forward in this journey, and that's how we started with PCAF.
Thank you, Sharad, and I'm glad you mentioned the word resilience. And adaptation, resilience are coming right up the agenda, and I think will be a big discussion in Sharm el Sheikh in a month or so's time. And so it's good that you have that focus. But can you tell me a little bit about kind of once you started working on the carbon accounts, what surprises did you run into? Did you run into any challenges or surprises?
Yes, definitely. The country, our central bank had come up with the climate-related guidelines only in 2022, and we have our ANS-related directive coming in 2020 only. So it's been a very recent action from the regulators, and one of the biggest challenges were being technically aware or having the capacity to understand the technicalities of carbon accounting. And then again, data management is one big thing to have for all the robust data analysis that is required. And having a basic coding within your system is something very important. We struggled a bit when we did our first exercise with PCAF. And then once we joined GIM, we took that a step further, and GIM has helped us analyzing our data, the industry data in generic, say specific to the country, and then again specific to NMB only, what kind of portfolio you have, even within say agriculture. There could be several subsectors, and Jim has helped us analyze the subsectors and see how we can have a more, have a precise data analysis within our portfolio in the bank.
Yeah, thank you. And I think going back to the points you made at the very beginning of the seminar about kind of, each country has its own kind of, energy system. Some of them kind of extremely carbon intensive, others actually quite carbon light. And in the case of Nepal, which is kind of relatively low GDP compared to some of your neighbours, but where if you use a regional average for data for emissions factors, then you're likely to get kind of, an emission factor that may apply in India or Vietnam or some other big economy in the region, but that won't represent the reality in Nepal. So hence the kind of focus in this modelling on being as granular as possible without kind of creating a monster of a model, kind of getting the balance right between kind of local granularity by sector and by country versus having something that's easily accessible and can be updated. And I think Helle is asking a question on the Q&A about those GHG estimations and how often they're updated. So it's a mix, Helle. So the GHG data and the economic data and the employment data is updated annually, but most countries only update their input-output tables, their social accounting matrices every X years, and I say X because it might be 3 years, it might be 5, and in some cases countries only update them every 10 years. So some parts of the modelling are kind of relatively have a time lag, and other bits are the most recent possible. It would be great, and I think it's probably very likely that countries will start to produce more regular and more detailed input-output tables as carbon accounting takes off, because although normally input-output tables are used for economic management, as carbon accounting and kind of discussions about kind of border adjustments and kind of carbon taxes takes off, then I think people will want to know exactly how their economies are structured in terms of carbon. And there'll be a strong incentive. These input-output tables aren't particularly difficult or expensive to do, but they just haven't been highly prioritized. But I predict that they will come up the priority list quite fast because of the importance of carbon accounting. So I hope that answers that question. So I'd like to go back to Justine, and I'm kind of conscious of time and conscious of, please do keep the questions coming in on the Q&A. But Justine, so first round, now you've sort of working your way towards having a decent set of accounts. What will be the next steps for the bank in terms of taking action?
Sure, I mean, taking us back to that image that you showed at the beginning of the various steps. The first step is to measure and understand what the financed emissions are and sort of what the impact is, and then what do you do with that information? So yeah, I think you're looking for the picture. Yeah, so what do we do now? We've set a baseline. One can report against it. One can benchmark yourself against your peers, but I think the important part there is taking action. So I think bringing that back to 2 points I wanted to cover, one about building capacity. So firstly, we've got to build capacity in the regions to understand what these measurements are, how to measure, how to report, and then what that means. So not just building capacity amongst our internally amongst our colleagues, but then amongst our peers, so that we're all measuring and reporting and disclosing in a comparative and sort of transparent way. So that, I think, is a focus for us, as well as bringing it back to the conversation about the just transition. So how do we take action? How do we start shifting our portfolios to lower carbon alternatives, but doing so in a way that takes account of these socioeconomic considerations in the countries that we operate. in South Africa, we're looking at sort of South African specific decarbonisation pathways for various sectors. There's a business-wide collaboration going on to try and identify those pathways. So how do we then, now that we know what our finance or portfolio emissions are, how do we start transitioning those according to those regional decarbonisation pathways? And I think using the information coming out of the GIM tool, how do we then start applying that to the other regions as well, and coming up with regionally specific targets and decarbonisation pathways? But again, it's all this sort of preliminary baseline financed emissions information that feeds into those trajectories.
Great. So that's really nice to see this kind of mechanism starting to work now. And going back to NMB, Sharad and Dinesh, do you have a kind of similar vision for how this is going to work?
Yeah, definitely, Alex. We did our first exercise with PCAF, and like I shared, in PCAF, you don't have country-specific data. The emission factor for Nepal, and you'll have to rely on rest of the world, Asia Pacific. That's the data they have, and they don't have country-specific data for many countries, especially in the emerging countries or emerging geographies. So with GIM, we are getting country-specific data, and we are discussing that at our level, that whatever emission factors are provided in specific areas. So we are trying to refine that. To answer your question, we had a score that we derived from our PCAF exercise, and our intent was to improve on the finance portfolio that we have, and we had also identified certain portfolio that has higher emission, like for example, in our case, it's largely infrastructure and construction and agriculture. And agriculture being a specific focus for us because of sustainable financing, as well as financing towards green financing. Then we would like to delve in more detailed how we can contain or control emissions while focusing on agriculture financing. So that's the business direction that we are getting, and we intend to refine that more with the GIM platform.
Thank you. And Julia, turning to you, wearing your FMO hat. So I know FMO as a development finance institution has kind of twin goals to kind of reduce its carbon footprint, but also to make a significant positive contribution to jobs in the countries where it operates. So how is FMO using the kind of the jobs functionality with the GHG functionality in the joint impact model?
Yeah, so at FMO, we actually, we're looking at both job supported and GHG emissions. You can see in our latest annual report, we use both sides of the model, and we apply the PCAF attribution evenly, because to us, we don't want to include all the jobs that are being supported by our clients, but we want to take our fair share of financing in the exact same way that we do for our emissions. And then that allows us to actually do a like-for-like comparison, where we can actually plot our emissions and our jobs on a scatter plot, and we can see, okay, which are the sectors that are actually have a lot of emissions but a low number of jobs. And then that's something that should be looked at more carefully to see what's going on in the sector. Is it really worth it to, are we doing the right thing with this particular sector? Or you might see a sector that has very low emissions, but also very low jobs. And sometimes you do see a linear trend, but in other times you see certain sectors that really deviate from let's say the average. And those are the sectors that we find extremely interesting and important to dive deeper into, to see if we can engage with particular client to help them reduce their emissions. I think that that's the most important part. The FMO strategy has just come out. We've committed to net zero by 2050, And I'm sure due to the data gaps, the GIM will be a key tool to be able to help figure out where we need to concentrate on.
Very good. So I'm conscious of time, and I see some of the questions kind of. I think we've answered most of them. But if we haven't answered your question, please put your hand up, and I'll ask you to say it. But I think it's come to that point where we should ask Justine, Sharad, and Dinesh whether they've got questions for the joint impact model, and you can tell us whether our kind of plan for the next couple of years looks kind of credible. Is it ambitious enough? Should we just help you two more, or should we go for this target, a stretch target of trying to engage 250, 240 banks? What would you like to see us doing more so that we can kind of fulfill this mission of supporting the banking sector in developing countries? Maybe Sharad and Dinesh, you go first.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I think one of the biggest challenges for us is managing our internal data. So someone had put up that question, 1 to 5 on this data quality score. So need to go up on that scale is something. And for Nepal, I would talk about the mindset of the stakeholder as well, because Dinesh had also touched upon that. Nepal is one of the countries who has probably the least impacting country as far as GHG emission is concerned. So why do we need to look into this as the mindset of rest of the stakeholders, and then changing that mindset is one thing. And probably transitioning from PCAF and now getting involved in GIM with regard to data. So should we have a GICS GICS classification or GTAP classification in our portfolio, that which would give us more flexibility or more robustness in our data? That's one question that I would have. And limited technical expertise within ourselves is something, and we would probably need more collaboration or support with regards to enhancing the capacity even to take this project forward, so that a basic capacity enhancement would be something if we could accommodate within the GIM model.
Great. Well, that will keep us busy. Justine, I'm sure you don't have anything to add to that shopping list for us.
No, just to add that I think growing the number of financial institutions that you support and that use the tool, it also adds huge value. It enhances that comparability, as well as improving, I think, the data coming into it. The more people using the tool, the better the data, the more backing I think there is behind the tool and the initiative, and that then is a sort of a feedback loop into improved data quality as well. So I think that's a great ambition to have.
I would just say I think that's certainly been the experience in the development finance institutions community, where some DFIs have approached their clients and asked for direct emissions data, particularly in the power sector and in some of the kind of major manufacturing sector, and have got direct data. So that can be sort of converted to a generic emissions factor, but it'll be quite accurate. So although it may kind of get a low PCAF score, a cement factory in Kenya compared to another cement factory in Kenya probably have pretty similar emissions profiles. And if one DFI has approached one cement factory, then using a Kenya emissions factor for all cement factories would probably be pretty good, unless the investor has a reason to think that their cement factory is very much more efficient, or that it's running 100% on renewables, or that there's some technology that has made a big breakthrough. But currently, I think they're quite undifferentiated within a sector in the country. So that kind of if one person does some direct measurement and we can insert that into the model, that probably improves the quality of the emissions factors quite substantially, even if it doesn't qualify for a direct reporting. But there's also the case that kind of sharing experience on targeting clients for direct data, and you can then, as Julia said, you can override the model by inserting direct data, and in GIM 3.0 that will improve your PCAF score once you've started using direct data in some cases. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that directly reported data can also have quite a lot of quality issues in it. So you need to be really sure that what you're getting directly reported is reliable. And so kind of an additional use for the modeling is just to do a reality check on the direct data you get. If it's way lower or way higher than the model estimates, then you might need to have a conversation with your client just to understand how they've generated that data. So there's a sort of, there's a sort of cycle between direct and models, I think, that works quite well. Julia, in terms of FMO, where will you take the model next? And also, what do you think will be the journey for Banco Pichincha?
Yeah, for FMO, I think the first thing we're looking at is regulatory reporting, to be honest. I think SFDR is coming very high on the list. And I saw a question that was asked earlier by Basque Knoll. And yes, indeed, we want to keep adding things to the GIM because we realize that actually for the areas where we're investing in emerging markets, a lot of the data that is needed to answer SFDR, the PIs as they're called, that data's most of the time not available. So that's why we're looking into proxies, and the GIM with some modifications can really serve these needs. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at in the short term. Yeah.
And I see we've got a question about how can banks kind of join up to the GIM. So is that a point to talk a little bit more about the pilot, the sort of second phase of the pilot, Julia? So we've got 3 banks, one from each continent: Latin America, Africa, and South Asia. But if another bank wants to join, have we got the capacity to do that at this stage?
Yeah, so we are actually working with several development finance institutions to be able to do a very in-depth, let's say, work with each financial institution. Will help them with the mapping, help them understand, okay, what is exactly needed, and we are looking at technical assistance from many development finance institutions that are looking to help with this effort. If a bank wants to join right now, they can do so. They just have to go on our website, but we won't be able to right away help them with such an intensive, let's say, help and training. But we hope to do that with further technical assistance that we are fundraising for at the moment.
Right. So short message is, ideally, if a bank already has investors from the development finance community, then it could be a good candidate for the expanded pilot project. If it's not currently, then I think the other people that we think should be supporting this effort of helping banks in developing countries is exactly initiatives like the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, and some of the other big alliances that have kind of mobilized a lot of resources. And those are kind of, we'd love to see some kind of technology transfer or technical assistance going from the biggest global banks who've built up very strong teams and have got resources to support other smaller banks, even if with smaller carbon footprints, to get engaged in the process. So we'll be having discussions with a lot of those players about how to support more banks. That will be our game. I see we're kind of close to the top of the hour, but I see one last question from FMO from Leia Quintanilla. What are the advantages of the GIM compared to other models? Good question. I think there's a lot of effort going into modelling, and we're aware of other models. We're aware of some good models being developed on the jobs accounting side, and we're also aware of people developing models on the carbon side. I think The one advantage of GYM is that it's a non-profit foundation, so the idea is that things should be free or at least non-profit making. There might be modest user charges to cover the secretariat, but we're not. This isn't being run by a commercial consultancy. There are other non-profit models around, possibly. I think they don't offer this joint functionality currently, as far as we understand. So they're pure carbon accounting tools without looking at GDP and jobs. And I think we've kind of been working quite hard so far on user friendliness. So although Justine, I know, is studying for a PhD, I think and I hope that you don't need a PhD to operate the GYM. Julia, what other advantages are there? Maybe
yeah, for me, a big advantage is also the fact that we are transparent with our methodology. So you'll see other models that they don't put out let's say a documentation or a very in-depth explanation of exactly how our model works. And the reason why we do that is because we believe that we're in a climate crisis and we have to share our methodologies with each other. The time for black boxes and the time for, IP protected codes and things like that, it has to come to an end, because we need to share with each other. Industry experts have to come together, and we need to provide solutions to those who need it.
Yeah. Lovely, thanks. I see one technical question from Birgit about microfinance. Maybe we can answer that with you, Birgit, offline, because I'm conscious we're now it's at the top of the hour and people have other sessions in New York Climate Week to go on to or back to work. But just a final word from Justine and from our guests in NMB Bank. And then we'll wrap up the session. And thank you very much to all of you participants for staying with us for this hour on impact modelling. So Justine, final word from you?
I think final word is don't be afraid to get started and leverage off all the support and collaboration and community around you that you can. Everyone's trying to solve this together. So rely on others and let's work together.
Great. And Sharad and Dinesh, a final word from Kathmandu?
I think I would add to what Justine has mentioned, that you need to start somewhere, and to begin and see where we stand is something that we need to do at first. So unless we begin it or unless we start analyzing it, probably we wouldn't know where we stand today. So doing that analysis first is something that we need to do. And since this is largely economic activity based emission accounting, so probably we need to take that a step further. And since there are certain nuances that is within a country and within your specific bank's portfolio, so unless you begin somewhere and deep dive and start segregating those or making it more, doing a more detailed analysis, then probably you wouldn't be up on the journey. So let's start it as soon as possible. That's something I'd say.
Very good, very good. Well, our next step will be to run a session in COP27 on or around the Finance Day. So either I think the 8th or the 11th of November in Sharm el Sheikh, where we'll be going deeper into this topic. So thank you very much for everyone who's attended. Please do get in touch with Julia at the GYM Foundation, or directly contact Justine at First Round or Sharad and Dinesh at NMB if you have questions. Please do keep the conversation going. Please do come to us for ideas. But thank you very much, and I hope you have a good week. New York Climate Week, it's kind of overwhelming, a number of things to go and do in addition to kind of carrying on with your day job. So I hope you all stay well, and thank you very much for joining us all.